It's time to go on the record with WRAL News.
Thanks for joining us for this special edition of On the Record. I'm Lena Tillett. Here's something that made me stop in my tracks while preparing for the show this week. Smartphones have only been used by the majority of Americans since 2012. This thing we hold on to nonstop, we can't part with, has only been in most of our lives for a decade. Today, nearly 95% of teenagers use social media, according to a new Pew Research study. 95%, a third of whom said they use it almost constantly. So think about that. We've only had smartphones for about a decade, and already social media use for young people is practically universal. During that same period, that same decade, the number of teens with clinical depression more than doubled. A CDC report out this year shows 4 in 10 high school students in this country experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, and nearly a quarter seriously considered attempting suicide. That awful statistic is even worse for teen girls. So the question is, why? How is it that a decade ago we all get smartphones, we begin using social media pervasively, and then teens' mental health begin to deteriorate? This week, the U.S. Surgeon General took the extraordinary step of issuing an advisory about social media use and youth mental health, stating clearly it is harming our kids.
I am very concerned now that social media is an important factor that is driving this youth mental health crisis. This is a real point of concern here. When nearly half of kids are telling us that social media use makes them feel worse.
Dr. Murthy's advisory then lays out steps parents, children, tech companies, and researchers can take to make social media use safer. And tonight we have a fantastic panel to dive into all of it, including a mom and daughter having to navigate this right now. Wake County mom and daughter Candace and Kendall Goins. Kendall is a rising senior at Wakefield High School. And our experts tonight are Dr. Robin Gurwitch, a clinical psychologist and Duke University professor, and Dr. Eva Telzer, an assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at UNC, who co-authored a new study that examined the brain scans of teenagers who use social media. So grateful that you all are here with me. So Dr. Gurwitch, I want to begin with you because the Surgeon General said that there is not enough evidence right now to show that social media is safe, and that instead all the evidence appears to be pointing to all the harms that it does to teenagers. So how should we understand that?
That's a great question. I think the bottom line is that there is so much more research needed in this area. Like you said, it's been around for a hot minute, and yet it's part of our lives. And we're beginning to look at the combination of the use of social media, continued use, I guess I should say, and the relationship with mental health issues like anxiety, depression, as you mentioned, concerns about how they fit in with their peers, concerns about what if I'm not on, what will happen. So all of that being said, we balance that with the idea that there are also some positive benefits that we can see with social media. So I think the report is saying, gosh, there's a huge risk for harm we need to take into account, but not throw it out with the bathwater. It's sort of how do we find that important balance?
Absolutely, a critical balance. Candace, how did the social media use conversation go in your household? Did you put some limits in place, or did you allow your daughters to use it freely?
No. So social media, we've always taken it very seriously. We didn't let either daughter, we have a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old, use it until 13 because Facebook says they can use it. You know, all my friends are using it. Well, Facebook, Instagram, they say 13. So we had like a little party when they turned 13 that midnight that they could actually have social media. And the only rules that we kind of put in place were if you're on it, I'm on it. So whatever platform she decided to join, guess who was also her friend on those platforms? Her dad and I. And so those are really the only things we put in place as they started.
It's so interesting, the concept of a party, finally, that you actually get on social media. Kendall, I can't imagine using Instagram and TikTok in high school. I mean, you're already a hot mess, right? You're awkward and you're trying to figure things out. So do you find it harmful or just fun?
Yes, it is fun, of course, but it can be harmful. It does have its harmful parts.
Like what?
Like what? I would say it's very time consuming. So like you'd spend like an hour on TikTok, an hour on Instagram, and like you realize like I've been scrolling for like 3 hours. And that's times I can be like making friends, you know, getting new hobbies, things that like just overall like experiencing life. It's also really like detrimental to like your self-esteem and mental health, because like you're constantly seeing the positives in everybody else's life. Like, oh, she's here with her friends. Oh, look how cute her outfit is. And like they're only posting their positives, so they might be going through the same things that you're going through, but you don't know because no one's posting it. So I can see both.
It definitely seems like you have grown to be very mature in the way that you see social media, though. I'm sure in the beginning you're probably thinking, these girls seem so perfect. How do I get perfect like they are?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Dr. Telzer, she brought up such a good point, the time factor. How critical is the time in terms of how much time they're spending on social media and the impact that then has on some of the harmful impacts?
Certainly. So the amount of time that adolescents spend online checking social media is perhaps a little bit less important than what they're doing online. So there's no cut off per se on how much time is too much. It's really what they're doing, how they're interacting online, and what they're exposed to that's potentially more problematic and harmful. If they're being exposed to negative things, that can impact their mental health. The mere time they're spending online is not the best metric, because they may be spending that time doing very positive things. Although, like Kendall said, it could take away from doing homework or spending time enjoying life.
It's so interesting that you say that, because it's about, it could be positive time spent. The U.S. Surgeon General mentioned in his advisory a cutoff after 3 hours is when it starts to get into a territory where anxiety and depression rates could double. So I found that interesting, and you're saying you think that it's more about the way that you're using social media than the time. How do you look at what the Surgeon General said?
Well, we need to put limits to what adolescents are doing online. There's not yet clear causal evidence or data to suggest that there's a certain amount of time. So we need to start somewhere. When we collect data in adolescents, we actually note that the average amount of time teens are spending on their smartphones is over 8 hours a day. So 3 hours a day is a pretty huge difference from what we see as their average amount of time spending on their phones. And so certainly limiting it in some ways is going to be very important.
And Dr. Gerwich, how would you advise parents to have that conversation in terms of how to limit time on social media and also how to try to channel that time spent in more positive ways?
Sure. I love what Candace said. If you're on it, I'm on it. So I think that really helps frame how social media will be used in families. I think also parents need to think about how are they modeling their own use of social media? If they're saying we don't use our phones at the dinner table and put boundaries there, are they having their phone right next to their plate to quickly scan or take a call or something else? If caregivers are saying everybody has to shut down an hour before bedtime because we know that it can truly interfere with sleep, are they powering down an hour before sleep? So it's one thing to have the conversation, which is critical, but it's another thing to model, to walk the walk.
Yes.
So that their adolescents are saying, all right, this really is something my caregivers are find important, and they're showing me by their actions as well.
Absolutely. Fantastic advice there. I have to tell myself before bed, put your phone down. Don't look at your phone. You're going to be up another hour if you even bring the phone to bed. Keep it away. It is not good for your brain. Thank you all. We are going to look at a study done right here in North Carolina on middle school students about how social media affects the brain after the break. Stay with us.
Mornings are busy. Don't worry, we have you covered.
That water main break.
About 5 degrees cooler. With new up-to-the-minute information you and your family need to start your day.
Your commute will likely be easier this morning.
Getting you prepared for the day every day.
We are only seeing a handful of delays.
Your time is important, so we don't waste it.
WRAL breaking news tracker in Raleigh.
All local, all morning, all for you. WRAL Morning News. Coverage you can count on.
Welcome back. We return with our panel discussing the Surgeon General's advisory on social media use and teen mental health. And Dr. Telzer, I want to talk about your study that you all did at UNC Chapel Hill because it's absolutely fascinating. You looked at the brain scans of middle school students in North Carolina over a period of time. What were you looking for and what did you find?
Sure. So the adolescent years are a time when the brain is undergoing really large changes in the way that the brain responds to its environment. It's undergoing what we call this reorganization of the brain. It becomes especially sensitive to its environment. This is coinciding when adolescent social media use is also rising. And so we were very interested in the ways that adolescents use social media and how their brain might be changing during these years, and found that teens who are habitually checking their social media profiles. So they're going on and checking their social media accounts constantly. We call these the habitual social media checkers. These adolescents are showing changes in their brains across the 3-year period in a way that is showing that they are becoming hypersensitive to their environment. They're showing hypersensitivity to social cues like peer feedback.
And what does that mean? What does that tell you?
Well, it tells us that the ways that adolescents are interacting online is potentially associated with the changes in the way that their brain is developing during this period. Those who are not habitually checking their social media do not show these same changes in the brain. Now, we don't know what this developmental change in the brain might mean, for example, downstream well-being, depression, social media addiction, or potentially relating to some adaptive outcomes like learning how to interact in a really digital world. But the data do suggest that there are changes in the brain during this really critical developmental period.
Candace, when you hear that there are changes in the brain, what goes through your mind as a mother that Kendall's use of social media could potentially be changing her brain development?
Look, I already think when they get to be teenagers, I'm like, oh God, here it comes. And so to hear this going on top of it makes me a little bit nervous. I'm really thankful that through self-realization, Kendall limits herself. She didn't mention that she puts a 3-hour timer, I think, daily limit on her phone herself. Mm-hmm. And I think she started to realize the effects of it as she used it more and more. So I'm thankful for that, but that's scary, especially when it's already a time of so much change in their lives, going from middle school to high school or from elementary to middle. And through puberty, that's a whole different ball game. So this just is really scary to see that this is coming on top of that.
I really received that word scary because I think also what this emphasizes is how young this is as a phenomenon, right? We are just getting to see brain scans of how middle school students' brains have changed with social media. This is really the first time that we're seeing a study like this, and we don't know what impact that will ultimately have. Kendall, do you feel, and this is a question I wasn't preparing to ask you, but I will. Do you kind of feel like a guinea pig a little bit as a teenager with social media apps? I mean, just like they're trying stuff out on you all without knowing what the impact will be.
Yeah, I do. I can see that. They're just going for it right now. Yeah.
So do you have conversations with your friends about what social media is potentially doing to the way that you're thinking about things, the way your emotions are? How do you discuss social media with your friends?
I mean, like, we'll talk about like things we see or like how that makes us feel, but none of us really come out and say like, oh, when I saw this, it made me upset. Because it's not really something you want to talk about, but I can tell that everyone is experiencing it, even if we don't say it.
Would you say sometimes you're on TikTok or Instagram and you see a post that immediately puts you in a bad mood?
That can happen, yeah.
And Candace, what do you do? How do you protect your daughter in those situations?
Well, I see it. I think I see it more than she does. When the girls are over here, Kendall's a cheerleader at school, and so some of the team kind of used to congregate over here, and you could see them. Oh my God, did you see such and such? Did you see such and such? And when it's something cool, everybody's excited. When it's something, kind of sad, you could tell it really affects them. Like, oh no, like you could see the sympathy and the empathy going on. And I just feel like it gives them a chance to experience each other's emotions so much more than when we were growing up.
Oh, that is so interesting. Dr. Gerwich, how do you respond to what they both said?
Well, first of all, I am so impressed that Kendall, and I think it comes from, again, her wonderful parents, is setting up some limits and boundaries herself. And that is not typical. So kudos to your family. I think that's outstanding. I think one of the points that was raised is that many times we've got adolescents reporting that they are exposed to hate-riddled content, to bullying, to images or comments that may make them feel bad. The flip side is that we also know that there are some marginalized teens that are finding opportunities to receive some much needed supports, to be able to find a group that they can relate to. So that can be a positive. As Dr. Telzer pointed out, we've got more and more information coming in. And certainly there are definite reasons to be concerned, but we don't have causations yet. Yeah. So we need to do more work. And I think it is truly going to take not just all of the responsibility being placed on parents and caregivers, nor on the adolescents, but also on policymakers, on the tech folks, on research. It really is going to take a village before we truly understand, but we are seeing, that being said, we are seeing some of those concerns. And I'll add real quickly, this isn't coming in a vacuum. This is coming on the heels of our adolescents losing several years of being with their peers due to the pandemic, lots of grief and loss due to the pandemic, many other changes. So it's not just social media, it is social media in conjunction with the pandemic, in conjunction with the social justice movement and a rise in hate and racism, and all of those things are impacting our youth. And so I think we really need to take a look at things as a whole.
Right, right. I do think that causality conversation is so important. And I want to ask you about that, Dr. Telzer. I will do that after the break as well. We're also going to look at some of the recommendations that the Surgeon General and the American Psychological Association has for parents. What are they saying that families should do? We'll tell you after the break. Welcome back. We continue our conversation about social media use and its impact on teens' mental health. Dr. Telzer, before the break, we talked about this concept of the causal relationship. If there is a cause and effect, you use social media and teens are depressed or they are anxious. And researchers tend to be very careful with saying that definitively. What is it that you're looking for in terms of a data point to say, okay, this now shows, yes, indeed, it is definitely causing depression or anxiety?
Sure. So first of all, this field of research is so new. because social media and technology are so new. So the data are continuing to come out, and there's just not enough causal evidence yet to make these claims that social media is causing depression. Much of the research to date, for example, has looked at the amount of screen time that teens use on average and look at their reports of depression on average. And these concurrent correlations don't tell us that one caused the other. In fact, there's probably bidirectional effects where adolescents who might be more depressed may go online more or may seek out certain content that is more depress-inducing. And so there are likely bidirectional effects, but we don't yet know that social media is causally linked to depression. In order to make those types of claims, we really need experimental evidence, which is very hard to do in adolescent humans. We can't experimentally manipulate who has access to social media and smartphones and who doesn't. And we also need longitudinal research. This means that we're following the same adolescents over many, many years to see how their social media use and their well-being and their adjustment are linked together over time.
And the Surgeon General also says you all need data from tech companies, and they are not giving you all that data. They don't want you to have that internal research, because then it could mean that they have to really change their practices, and they wouldn't want to do that. That could impact their business. Dr. Gurwitch, let's talk about the American Psychological Association's recommendations. One of the recommendations is so simple: time limits, because it's impacting sleep. We don't think about sleep and how critical that is for teens, but social media use is affecting sleep, isn't it?
It is, because what we're seeing is that oftentimes teens go to bed with their smartphones right next to their pillows, and they are constantly worried about a text coming through if I don't respond fast enough, and so that concern is there for many, which interrupts sleep. And if I'm not getting enough sleep, my brain doesn't have a chance to do all the wonderful things that Dr. Telzer was talking about that are important during adolescence. And if I'm not getting enough sleep, it's harder to pay attention and learn in school. It just has cascading impacts. I'm not as I'm more irritable, perhaps, with my friends, with my family, if I'm not getting sleep. So definitely thinking about one of those recommendations is having that tech-free zone at dinner time, around bedtime. Can you put it aside and then wake up? And that's much easier said than done. And we need to recognize that, but have those conversations.
Candace, you have a beautiful 17-year-old and 21-year-old. Clearly, they look like you did some great parenting. What advice would you share with other parents that you wish someone could have shared with you about how you could have managed the social media use in your home?
Be present. That's the biggest thing I can tell you. Her father and I, we both work from home. We both are very busy, do a lot. But the one thing that we have never failed to do is be present in their lives. If something is going on, we are constantly talking about it. She comes in, she tells us what happens at school, whole day, sometimes too much. And when, at dinner, we talk, she tells us, she's the one who says, put the phones down. It's interesting. But I find a lot of times that I see that there's problems is that people don't even know that their children are on social media or have it. I know there's such thing called a Finsta, like a other Instagram that parents don't know about. And so just be present, be aware of what they're doing and what they're posting.
That is great advice. Candace, Kendall, thank you so much. Dr. Telzer and Dr. Gurwitch, thank you. If you have something to say about tonight's discussion, let me know. Leave a comment and share this video with your friends. With daily uploads, there will always be a conversation.